which quadratic function has a positive leading coefficient? So we have to be aware of the forms of quadratic functions. Now, the first form is the standard form, and that says that we have a leading coefficient of a multiplied then by our variable squared, plus then some coefficient of b multiplied by just then the variable, not squared, plus then some constant c without any variable associated with it. All right, that's one form. Another form of a quadratic function can be the vertex form. All right, and the vertex form here has a positive leading a leading coefficient of a. It doesn't have to be positive, it could be negative, but a leading coefficient of a multiplied by some squared binomial, where inside of that binomial you'll have your variable minus then some constant h, which will eventually represent something about the vertex, which we'll cover later, and plus then some constant k, which will represent also something about the vertex. Last but not least, we have the following factored form, all right, where the leading coefficient is going to be a again, but now we're going to multiply it by two binomials, okay, and these would be considered the roots of those, or factors, I should say, of that quadratic function. So we have in both cases, we have an x, and that's then going to be minus, okay, some root value. We'll talk about that once we get to the zeros of quadratic functions in our later chapter. Okay, but I'll label them R1 and R2 for now. They just represent two numbers. Whatever they are, it depends on the quadratic function. So now the goal is to look through our answer choices and try to identify, I guess, what form is what, and then see what we can deal with. So I noticed my first choice here is in which one? Which form? It's actually in, what do you think? Right, it's in factored form, okay? And the leading coefficient here is, is that a negative 2? Yes, that's exactly right. This is our leading coefficient, a. Now that has a negative leading coefficient, so this is out. It's not positive. Next answer choice, I notice here that this actually is not, now be careful, what form do you think that's in? Now this is subtle. It turns out that it is not in vertex form, right? Did you catch it? There's no squared term here, there's no 2. It's actually not in vertex form. It's actually technically in none of these three forms. Does that mean it's not a quadratic? Well, no, it actually still is a quadratic. We just have to do a little math, a little manipulation in order to kind of see it. If I were to take this negative x and multiply it to each term inside of that binomial, right, I would get negative x times x would be a negative x squared. Negative x multiplied by a positive 4 would be a negative 4x. And then a we wouldn't distribute that. And then we just have a positive 3 that remains. So this now we recognize. That's actually the standard form. All right, and the a value here is going to be the leading coefficient, the coefficient that's in front of the x squared. Remember, when there's not a value there, we can just put a 1. So it's actually a negative 1 that's in front of that x squared. So this term, this has a negative 1 as a leading coefficient. And I'll just mark this as a negative 2 for now. We move on to our next choice, and we notice here that this is indeed now in vertex form, right? We do have that squared there. So this is looking pretty good so far. And everything kind of lines up. The signs may not be beautiful, but don't worry about that. That's okay. But what I notice here is that the a, or the leading coefficient here is a 2. Since there is no sign in front of it, I can assume it's a positive 2. So this is looking really good so far of having a positive 2. Last but not least, I look at the last choice, and I realize that this is also in vertex form. All right. Now remember what we talked about. There is no number here, it's a negative, but since there's no number there, we can place in a 1 there as a placeholder. So it's really going to be, the leading coefficient there is a negative 1, okay, because it's really a negative 1 multiplied by each of those two terms inside of there. And we couldn't really, remember though, we couldn't really do that right away because this is squared. So we would have to follow the PEMDAS rules. We'd actually have to square this first, and then we can do our distribution after that, all right? But in any case, I think we can clearly see now which one has a positive leading coefficient. Thanks so much for tuning in. I really do hope this helped. We'd love to help you through your coursework. All right, check out our website. We'll see you over there.
For more practice and for more fun,
go to glazersguide.com.
And for more practice and for more fun, come on, go to glazersguide.com.